In March 1945, the Second World War in Europe was entering its final, brutal stage. The Allies had crossed France, liberated Belgium, and were pushing into the heart of Germany. Yet one of the greatest natural barriers still stood before them: the Rhine River. Broad, fast, and defended, it represented Germany's last significant defensive line in the West. No army had crossed it under fire and held the ground beyond it since Napoleon. For the Allies, the Rhine symbolized the threshold to victory, and for the German defenders, it was the last line before the collapse of the Reich. At the small German town of Remagen, what unfolded would become one of the most remarkable engineering and combat feats of the war: the capture and defense of the Ludendorff Bridge. It was an accident of fate that would give the Allies a bridgehead across the Rhine days, even weeks before they had planned. But it was also an engineering miracle, built and held together by men who were not frontline soldiers, but combat engineers, sappers who built bridges under fire and in hellish conditions, where one mistake could mean death for hundreds. The Ludendorff Bridge was built during World War I as part of Germany's rail network. Spanning nearly 400 meters, it connected the western town of Remagen with the eastern bank at Erpel. By March 1945, it was one of the last remaining crossings over the Rhine that had not yet been destroyed. Every other bridge along the river had already been blown up by retreating German forces to delay the Allied advance. As American forces advanced toward the Rhine, the German High Command had ordered that all bridges be prepared for demolition. At Remagen, the order was clear. When the Americans approached, the Ludendorff Bridge was to be destroyed immediately. However, confusion, poor communication, and exhaustion among the defenders meant the charges were not properly wired, and some explosives were missing. On March 7, 1945, units of the U.S. 9th Armored Division, advancing faster than anyone had anticipated, arrived at the outskirts of Remagen. What they found stunned them. Through the smoke of artillery and retreating German vehicles, they saw it: the Ludendorff Bridge, still standing. Against all expectations, the last intact bridge across the Rhine was right in front of them. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann, commanding the lead elements of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, immediately understood the opportunity before him. If they could seize the bridge intact, they could establish a bridgehead east of the Rhine and accelerate the Allied push into Germany. Timmermann radioed his superiors, who could hardly believe what they were hearing. General William Hoge, the division commander, gave a simple, historic order: take that bridge. Under constant German fire, infantry, tanks, and engineers rushed forward. The Germans attempted to detonate the bridge, but the charges, hastily set and partly sabotaged, failed to bring it down. A massive explosion tore holes in the structure, but it remained standing, swaying, smoke pouring from its beams. American engineers dashed forward under machine gun and mortar fire, cutting wires, defusing charges, and assessing damage, while bullets struck the iron girders around them. These men were from the 9th Armored Division's Engineer Battalion, soldiers trained to build, not just to fight. They carried wire cutters, pliers, hammers, and explosives, moving from beam to beam in full view of German snipers. Their task was to keep the bridge from collapsing long enough for troops to cross. By late afternoon, the first American units were running across the damaged span. Tanks followed, the heavy vehicles trembling the already weakened structure. It was a moment of controlled chaos. Every step could mean life or death. German artillery began pounding the bridge and the approaches. Mortars fell, snipers fired, and anti-aircraft guns on the far bank raked the Americans trying to cross. Still, they pressed on. The first tanks reached the eastern bank. Within hours, U.S. forces had established a small but vital bridgehead. The unthinkable had happened. The Allies were across the Rhine, not by pontoon or air assault, but over a captured German bridge. Eisenhower himself was informed that night. When he heard the news, he reportedly said, "That bridge is worth its weight in gold." But capturing the bridge was only the beginning. Keeping it standing would be a battle of its own. The Ludendorff Bridge had already suffered heavy structural damage from the failed demolition. Its wooden planks were splintered, its steel trusses bent. The engineers now faced an impossible task: to repair the bridge, keep it operational, and continue allowing thousands of men, tanks, and vehicles to cross, all while under constant bombardment. German command quickly realized the importance of the situation. The Rhine had been breached, and they launched every possible effort to destroy the bridge before more Allied troops could cross. The Luftwaffe, though reduced to a shadow of its former strength, mounted repeated air attacks. Jet-powered Me-262s, Arado 234 bombers, and conventional fighters dropped bombs and rockets on the structure. Artillery from both banks rained down continuously. On the bridge itself, American engineers worked day and night. They patched holes, reinforced beams, and replaced timbers even as shells exploded nearby. Men carried steel girders across the river under darkness, welded damaged supports, and threw sandbags into the water to reinforce the piers. Every few minutes, a shell would strike close by, sending debris into the air. Yet the engineers continued their work as if in a factory, methodical and relentless. Lieutenant Hugh Mott and his team became particularly famous for their courage. They crossed the bridge multiple times under fire, cutting charges and repairing sections that threatened to collapse. One sapper later recalled, "You didn't think about getting hit. You thought about keeping that bridge up one more hour." Within 24 hours, over 8,000 American troops had crossed to the East Bank. Tanks, artillery, and supplies followed. The bridge became a lifeline, a physical and symbolic connection between the Old Front and the final invasion route into the German heartland. The defense of the Ludendorff Bridge was relentless. German forces threw everything they had at it. Artillery barrages targeted the approaches, Luftwaffe pilots dove through thick flak to drop bombs, and frogmen attempted to sabotage it from below. One German frogman unit managed to reach the base of the bridge, but their explosives failed to detonate properly in the cold current of the Rhine. At one point, the Germans even launched V-2 rockets toward the site, a desperate attempt to obliterate the crossing from afar. None of them hit. The bridge, though battered and scarred, stood defiant. The engineers, now working around the clock, faced a challenge that was both mechanical and psychological. The constant vibration from tanks and trucks crossing caused bolts to loosen and beams to bend. Every explosion threatened to turn the entire structure into twisted steel. They reinforced it with everything they could find: spare rails, logs, cables, even the steel from wrecked vehicles. Each repair was temporary, each crossing a gamble. The engineers knew that at any moment the bridge could collapse beneath them. Yet they never stopped. Their work was often done under direct sniper fire. Men carried tools instead of rifles, crouching low as bullets sparked off the girders. On March 10th, General Omar Bradley visited the site personally. He later wrote that he had never seen such courage and determination among non-combat troops. They were fighting a different kind of battle, he said, one of endurance, of steel and sweat rather than gunfire. In the following days, the bridge had expanded. Entire divisions were now crossing. Engineers constructed additional pontoon bridges nearby to ease the load. But the Ludendorff remained the main artery. It had become a symbol of Allied resolve, proof that ingenuity, timing, and courage could accomplish the impossible. Then, on March 17th, after 10 days of relentless strain, fate finally caught up. Without warning, the damaged structure gave way. With a roar that echoed for miles, the central span of the Ludendorff Bridge collapsed into the Rhine, taking 28 American engineers with it. Dozens more were injured. The news spread quickly. Though tragic, the bridge had already served its purpose. By the time it fell, tens of thousands of troops and countless tons of equipment had already crossed. Several other bridges, constructed by Allied engineers upriver and downriver, were now operational. The Ludendorff remained the main artery. It had become a symbol of Allied resolve, proof that ingenuity, timing, and courage could accomplish the impossible. Then, on March 17th, after 10 days of relentless strain, fate finally caught up. Without warning, the damaged structure gave way. With a roar that echoed for miles, the central span of the Ludendorff Bridge collapsed into the Rhine, taking 28 American engineers with it. Dozens more were injured. The news spread quickly. Though tragic, the bridge had already served its purpose. By the time it fell, tens of thousands of troops and countless tons of equipment had already crossed. Several other bridges, constructed by Allied engineers upriver and downriver, were now operational. The Rhine barrier was broken. Germany's western defenses had been pierced beyond repair. The men who built and maintained the bridge became legends within the engineering corps. Their actions demonstrated that logistics and engineering were not secondary to combat. They were combat. Every girder, every bolt they tightened under fire represented courage equal to that of the infantrymen storming the front lines. After the war, the remains of the Ludendorff Bridge were never rebuilt. The 2 stone towers on either side of the Rhine still stand today as silent witnesses. In Remagen, a museum now occupies the western towers, the Peace Museum, dedicated to the memory of those who fought and died there. The twisted remains of the bridge still lie in the riverbed, visible when the water runs low, a relic of the day when an engineer's bridge held back the tide of history. The crossing at Remagen changed the course of the war's final weeks. The early foothold across the Rhine allowed Allied forces to pour into the Ruhr, encircling and destroying the last major German army group in the west. It shortened the war in Europe by weeks, perhaps months. For the soldiers who were there, it was a lesson in the power of preparation, chance, and sheer will. The engineers who built and sustained that bridge did so not for glory, but for duty, because it had to be done. In the words of one survivor, "We weren't heroes, we were builders, but that day building was the fight." The story of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen remains one of the most extraordinary moments of the Second World War. It showed that wars are not won solely by generals or strategies, but by the courage of individuals who, under unimaginable pressure, refused to give up. A single engineer, a single bridge in the middle of hell, and a river that was supposed to stop an army, crossed by men who believed that no obstacle was impossible.